Next fall, the nation will gather 2 tributes from each state and territory, one boy and one girl stepping into the lights to honor the country. Across 4 relentless days, they'll run, climb, battle, and outlast, not just for medals, but for glory and for their district. Every second is televised, every moment is scored, and every victory comes with a chance at immortality and to live in the victor's village. These are the early details for the Freedom 250 celebration alongside the Great American State Fair and other big-ticket spectacles such as UFC on the White House lawn. Not sure what events these folks are going to compete in. Maybe decathlon? Seems like there should be some swimming or some type of ball sport, maybe cup stacking.
I'm kind of torn between who are we? It's like, who have we become? And how does this have the attention of the presidency? And then the second one is, I wish I were in high school so I could have thrown my hat into the ring for competition.
May the odds be ever in their favor.
Indeed.
Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's December 22nd, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
I'm great, although we did break our streak. I notice it's the 23rd episode that we're recording on the 22nd. Although it's going to be aired on the 23rd, so...
Right.
Okay, yay. Okay. I was concerned that we had lost our streak of convergence between what episode we were doing and the date on which we were doing it.
No, we're not that organized. That's all just happenstance, and we should buy a $1.6 billion lottery ticket.
We probably should. Fortune favors us, we are the bold, the brave. Maybe we ought to check and see if we've got some sort of deferred eligibility for the National Hunger Games or something, given that we're so lucky.
Patriot Games.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I wonder how I could have confused it with the Hunger Games. It's craziness. Holidays are upon us.
Ho, ho, ho.
Ho, ho, ho. I was thinking we covered songs and we covered movies. As we approach the day itself, I was thinking about toys.
Yeah.
And things I got in my youth. Do you have any particularly memorable toys you got?
Yeah, some memorable Christmas mornings. One year I got a little micro machines. It was like a submarine that opened up, and then it had, I think it was an SSBN because it had a couple big missiles that it would shoot out the top and a couple little guys and tanks would roll at the back. So it wasn't really true to form, but it was pretty cool. What about you?
So many great memories. So the one that pops to mind is, and this is just like a whole bunch of memories come flooding back. It's a picture of me and my sister, Nancy, when we were stationed. I don't know that we ever talked about, I'm the kid of a career naval officer. And we were stationed in Jacksonville, Florida. And there's this picture of me and my sister, Nancy, in, of course, matching winter coats.
Nice.
Holding, I know, like global warming, like Jacksonville, we needed winter coats. And holding in front of us, seriously, ballpoint pens. They were called Lindy pens. I remember this many years later, 63 years later, because I was 4 in Jacksonville. I remember the name of this ballpoint pen, and we had the biggest, cheesiest smiles on, and we're holding these Lindy pens in front of us on a picture taken to send my dad on deployment. And I just think it's just such a snapshot of middle America in the 60s, right? Where that was the big gift, that our dad was deployed and you captured the memories so that even though over time and distance, you were all together. So that's, I don't know, pretty profound. I mean, there were other gifts, but I think that memory just pops into my head, and I think it's iconic in its own way. I also have a memory, something I asked for repeatedly and didn't get. I wanted the game Mystery Date. And I don't know, it was where you moved around the board and you had to achieve certain milestones. And then when you got to the right place, you opened up this door in the middle of the board and you found whether your mystery date was like Ken in a white dinner jacket or a guy named Poindexter, who was somehow less cool. Knowing me back then, I probably would have thought Poindexter was a cooler, maybe like, I don't know, Jim, who was standing with a surfboard or something is probably who I would have chosen. But I never got it. My parents probably just thought it was ridiculous and like, that is not the aspiration we're gonna give to our daughter. And I came up with a great mystery date on my own and didn't have to have the game.
There you go.
Lots of great memories on the holidays, but the picture does remind me that for all the families that are separated for one reason or another, that they can't all get together, sharing and being close has always been a huge part. And now it's easier because we've got the digital universe and instantaneous photos. So share, keep your families together.
That's right. And you hold on to that mystery date memory, and maybe Scott Calvin will bring
Ah,
it to you to
me.
remind you to believe in Christmas or your weenie whistle.
Oh my gosh. I might have to watch that later this evening. All
Hmm.
right. Should we get to work?
All right. 90 billion euros, zero interest, and zero illusions. Europe finds Ukraine's survival as Putin sells a US-EU split. The real story isn't the loan. It's the fractures, the propaganda, and what Intel says Putin still wants next. $901 billion NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, 4% pay raise, and a quiet Pentagon reshuffle that could redraw the maps of U.S. power. A $6 billion fusion moonshot, or a new national security scheme to exploit. Trump media jumps from True Social into utility-scale energy. So we'll start with Putin and the Ukraine war. We haven't talked about that in a week or so. Europe just made a big, pragmatic bet on Ukraine's staying power. The EU leaders agreed to line up 90 billion euro in zero-interest loans to keep Kyiv financially afloat through 2026 and 2027 after a bruising internal debate and after backing away from the more explosive option of tapping frozen Russian state assets. But the agreement also put Europe's fault lines on full display. Countries like Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic only came along after carving out exemptions, even as frontline states argue Ukraine's survival is existential to Europe's security. Putin is still trying to turn that tension into a narrative win. He praised Trump's push to end the war as sincere, then framed it as the ball's now in Kyiv's court, not Moscow's. The message lands harder because Kremlin has publicly welcomed the 2025 U.S. national security strategy we talked about before, as broadly aligned with Russia's worldview. And the intelligence backdrop matters here too. Reuters citing U.S. intelligence reports, Putin has not abandoned the intent of capturing all of Ukraine and reclaiming part of Europe that belonged to the former Soviet Union. On Saturday, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard posted on X that intelligence officers have briefed lawmakers that Russia seeks to avoid a larger war with Europe and that troops' performance in Ukraine show it currently lacks the capacity to overrun all of Ukraine, let alone Europe. She called the Reuters report a lie and propaganda and said that Reuters is willingly pushing on behalf of warmongers who want to undermine President Trump's tireless efforts to end this bloody war that has resulted in more than 1 million casualties on both sides. So, Sue, what do you think about the financing coming from Europe and then also this kind of conflicting reports between our ODNI and also what we understand to be Putin's aims?
So many thoughts as you're going through it. Everyone wants to talk about peace. Peace is close, blocking peace. Security is assured. Ukraine's ready to compromise. On the one hand, each one of those things is aspirationally correct, but the distance between the discussion and real progress is huge. So
Right.
I think you and I even were susceptible early in the year to a little bit of happy dancing when something looked like it was going to be a good trend. But it's so far away and the people are just posturing. The European piece is huge. I think there are going to certainly be a lot of fault lines as they try and actually put that money in the various countries' budgets and then move it. But the idea that they are kind of guaranteeing through 26, 27 resources for Ukraine, I think is a big deal. One of those other signals that the U.S.'s separation from the world is causing changes in behaviors and in a weird kind of pull. I don't like it much in a lot of respects, but much like in his first, when Trump kind of pulled out of the Middle East, there is an effect of other free and open societies or other countries deciding that they're gonna involve themselves in what's happening in their region. So, huzzah to Europe, and I think it's a good move. As for the storylines being advanced by Putin and Russia, that Europe and Ukraine are blocking peace, that Putin's ambitions are somehow limited, and then the spurious our national defense strategy aligns with Putin is all it's very Russia propaganda-y. That it kind of aligns with what the US says itself is I think it's bad signaling to the world. It's much more representative of the Trump administration being much more about getting any kind of deal to say it made a deal, and then it will frame it however it chooses, than it is about real national alignment with Russia. Now, what the difference between those two things is, I'm not really sure. But I think it's just this administration is uninterested, it seems, in the hard work to align itself with a free nation that was invaded and recognizing the importance of supporting that endeavor rather than being able to say it got its 397th peace deal. You asked about the intelligence piece. Well, I have two thoughts that kind of counterbalance one another. Reuters got their information from somewhere, and I don't think, based on my history, that there's much doubt that Russia doctrinally is interested in undermining democracy wherever it exists, does have long-term views, and if it really is stretched so thin that it couldn't possibly move against Europe, then why haven't they withdrawn from Ukraine?
Right.
Right, so come on. I don't really like these things being so out in the open that the director of national intelligence comes out and calls things stupid or countermands it or potentially lies about what the intelligence itself said. When it plays out publicly, it undermines confidence in the independence in the intelligence agencies one
Hmm.
way or another. One way or another. Again, what reason do intelligence organizations, the professional cadre, have for producing an incorrect, different from what they assess view? What what motivation do they have? And then what motivation does the director of national intelligence have for suggesting that what has been made public, and again, I don't like leaks of classified information. I think they're always bad. But when you look at the two sides, who has the most reason to say something that's not true? I just simply don't believe that Putin has somehow turned into a peace-loving supporter of free societies and that he has given up all ambitions of restoring the Soviet Union of his glory days.
Yeah, that sounds like him.
Yeah, exactly. Come on. Actually, though, the one piece in all this discussion that does ring maybe true to me is the Ukraine ready to compromise. We have talked about before that for all these outsiders talk about what this costs, if you are Zelensky, if you're President Zelensky, the weight you must feel to ease the burden on your people must be huge. And so I think it's probably absolutely true that he has some flexibility, even to include whether he would not pursue NATO membership. But I think what he cannot do, and what he has said repeatedly he cannot do, is to cede territory that has been forcibly invaded. So this is gonna go on for a long time. I don't like how the US looks in this, and I don't like the DNI coming out and saying what has not been true for 40 years, and that is that somehow Russia has become a supporter of open societies.
Yeah, difference between compromise and appeasement,
Yeah.
right, for
Yep.
Zelensky. There's gonna have to be some form of
Yep.
compromise, but
He's
giving
gonna
up
have
that
to.
territory. I think what you said about the financing going through 2 years is huge, whether because of instantaneous connectivity or because we're just such a short attention span society now. We don't have the long time horizon focus that a lot of other countries do or a lot of other cultures do. And Putin's certainly playing the long game on this one. So to have that backstop and that funding, when we'll talk about the NDAA here next, both from Europe and from the United States a little bit further down the road. I think will be great for the bargaining table.
Everyone plays the long game against the United States, and no more so than against this administration, right? Historically, we have shown that we can't stand there, and there's no discussion going on. This is one of my many soapboxes. I pulled out just this one from underneath the couch for today, but we're having no discussion with the American people about why this is in our interest. Zero. There's no debate on the Hill. This administration isn't talking about why it matters to us that we don't just capitulate to someone who's in a big country who wants to take a small country. And then the third is, if Putin is really struggling financially, leave. Leave Ukraine. It all can go away tomorrow. But we won't stay with it because we have our own fish to fry. Leaders these days don't seem to have the wherewithal to have a meaningful discussion about what America's interests are. And saying America's interest is America just isn't enough in a multidisciplinary environment. We're going to get to this in the new year as we come into an election cycle. People, you need to think about what you're asking of the people who would seek to be your representative and what conversations you insist on hearing from them so that you can have an opinion about where your money gets spent. Just saying.
That's right.
I'm shoving the box back under my couch. I might need
Right.
another one later.
I was going to say, you're going to have an opportunity here for another one shortly because Congress just passed and the president has signed the FY 2026 National Defense Authorization Act. About $901 billion. A lot of people are framing it as nearly $1 trillion, locking in core Pentagon policy plus a 4% troop raise. Usually we see closer to 3%. And a very explicit message that Washington is still underwriting European security, including $800 million, $400 million split across 2 years as part of the Ukrainian Security Assistance Initiative, which pays U.S. companies for weapons for Ukraine's military, and $175 million for the Baltic Security Initiative. This supports countries like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia's defenses, alongside limits for drawing down U.S. forces. So some of the highlights that came out of it: the NDAA did not itself formalize the renaming to the War Department. It's recognized as a secondary name or an alternate name. So we still got Department of Defense. The bill limits the reduction of U.S. forces in Europe, including a floor of 76,000 troops in reporting, codifies into law executive orders by President Trump ending diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at the Pentagon. Interestingly, it repeals the 1991 and 2002 authorizations for the use of military force against Iraq. This is interesting because in 2020, it is part of the legal justification that President Trump used in his first administration for going into Iraq to kill Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani. Sue, what are your thoughts on the NDAA getting passed and some of these highlights here?
I'm glad it got passed. It's usually one that is passed earlier because national security is something that has historically been a bipartisan issue, and so usually doesn't take this long. And it really does matter when you're on continuing resolution, especially if it's a big acquisition bill as the NDAA is. So yay, I'm glad we did it. I'm laughing because to say 900 billion is almost $1 trillion, kind of
Nearly $1 trillion.
nearly $1 trillion, $100 billion here or there. Soon you're talking
Right.
about real money. I think there are some things about it that are good. And just for our listeners, it's a really typical bill in the sense that it does some big things like locking in great power competition. For this administration and for you and I, it does emphasize speed of acquisition and industrial base scale and talks about commercial. And so I think those are all things that need to be done. I will say none of them are new in terms of aspirations. So it'll be interesting to see whether they had the effect that we want. That was clearly a focus of this NDAA. It does expand Pentagon authority, which again is kind of a watchword of this administration, which is interesting because in the first administration, they pushed for agencies not having a lot of authority, but in this administration, their agencies, they want to have a lot of authority outside of the legislature. But it does trim some oversight. And I think the reality of being a nation with a huge installed base it does tend to make us slower because over the years you stack things on top of each other and you stack regulations and you add more things that keep more bad things from happening. You end up getting slower. So I think there's some big picture things about this that are very consistent with not only what this administration said its priorities were, but actually some pretty big needs. We'll talk in a minute about the realignment of the unified commands. I don't usually mind reduction in overhead, but what you have to be left with has to make sense in terms of do you have the expertise you need? So we'll talk about that. I don't know if I can personally bear much more of this DEI stuff, the number of things that are captured under anti DEI. And maybe I'll force us to have a conversation on this in the new year. It is really fun to talk about merit. I think we need to have a conversation about meritocracies, how hard they are to achieve, and how, given if you look at who have done amazing things over the course of our history, you might find that you wouldn't lose men in the process of enforcing a meritocracy, but there would be fewer protections for them historically. So I'm tired of the DEI stuff because I think in general, while there was some overreach on process, I think the idea that we still are not representative of the American people in all our institutions is something that needs to be addressed. I did think it was interesting that there was nothing in there about federal pause on AI laws. Now, I don't know if that's where it necessarily had to show up, but it wasn't in there.
There's so much extra crap that gets thrown in there, so why not?
That was gonna be the last point I was gonna say is there is always extra crap. There is always little stuff that are
Yep.
special interests that get thrown in, the results of lobbying efforts, but let's, lean on your expertise a little bit. Let's talk about what they did with the COCOMs or what they're proposing with the COCOMs. What do you think?
Yeah, so there's reports that the Pentagon's considering a major combatant command consolidation aligned with the 2025 strategy. So you've got geographical combatant commands, which are based on regions of the world, right? And then you've got functional combatant commands, which are based on functions like cybercom, SOCOM, transcom, etc. This idea would be to roll EUCOM, European Command, AFRICOM, and Central Command into a new U.S. International Command. It also consolidate existing NORTHCOM and SOUTHCOM, which is North America, South America, into a new U.S. Americas Command. And then the functional commands would remain intact. The argument is for fewer headquarters, fewer 4-stars for speed and coherence. But the criticism is that it could dilute regional expertise and slow responsiveness, and Congress is already pressing for cost strategy impacts before anything moves. So the geographic command commands were never perfect. You're always going to have some country or some weird overlap. A couple examples. Turkey is a NATO ally, right? They're in European Command, but a lot of the Syria-Turkey triangle inherently crosses the AOR, the area of responsibility with CENTCOM, and Turkey was a major ally in the Operation Inherent Resolve and combating ISIS. Another example is Egypt, one of the more easily recognized African countries, decidedly on the African continent. They're part of CENTCOM, Central Command, just because of the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Like you said, so consolidating and streamlining is always better. I don't particularly have a problem with the realignment of geographical commands.
Yep.
Whatever makes the most, I feel like I'm JD Vance in the donut store, whatever makes sense. But whatever makes sense functionally for the commander to best handle. You're always going to have countries and areas falling in and out. But it is interesting. You'd have INDOPACOM, standalone, Indo-Pacific Command. You got this international command, which is the rest of the world, and then the Americas. It'd be different.
Yeah, over time, whatever organizational structure you choose, the seams in that organizational structure start to show. It hardly matters how you do it if you've made clear what you're trying to do. And
Yeah.
again, we have a discussion of let's make it more efficient as the reason for reorganizing it with no mention how you maintain the expertise and focus. And because remember, it's not always about U.S. interests. It's about how we have to be aligned in order to be able to deal with the interests of our partners, allies, adversaries, and competitors, and what's the best way to do that. But I don't think I would be me if I ever argued for one particular structure over another. I would prefer we know what we're trying to do, and then any organization can be made to do. You
Yeah.
are going into a period of inefficiency. You're going to be moving a whole lot of people. So that's not great. And have you maintained the expertise that you need in order to do it. As far as the functional commands, I can't believe I'm gonna say these words. It's a digital world, and so cyber command makes a lot of sense topically. Does it make sense where cyber is increasingly a modality, and doesn't every command have to have some cyber capabilities? So is cyber command really a staffing and training function? I don't know. Space command is unusual. Is the idea of a command the right idea for a space domain? Which, again, who are the operators doing it? It's not the operation of space, it's the operation of space to what end, and whose priorities that aligning. So I think there's still some real questions in these new commands on how they most support new age operations. But I think I'm okay with that, except for it's counter to the idea of getting all our energy focused on what we're doing as opposed to how we're doing it. I guess one last thing as we were talking, I think when I look at this NDAA more than many, and notwithstanding the 4% raise for service members, it isn't talking a lot about people and how you're going to train, move, support those humans with more than pay in terms of being ready to prosecute national security the way it needs to be prosecuted now. So again, it's a very tool-centric budget, not people-centric budget, even though it has some aspects of humans. I don't know that it's really focused on all the tools they're gonna need to compete.
Yeah, Spacecom is interesting because it's often grouped with the functional commands, but it's also geographic because it's AOR is space. And then Cybercom was originally established as a subunified command under Stratcom.
Yep.
And then DoD and Congress pushed it out for a full unified command because they said the mission needed a 4-star with direct access. I've said this before, I'm skeptical of all the different cyber things we have, right? NSA and also CISA and the National Cyber Director, and each intelligence agency has their own cyber. And
Yep.
so where does that fall? I get they're all different domains and they all have different functions, and to just ignore it in the military domain is short-sighted, but it seems like that could be an opportunity for some maybe streamlining.
I think that's right, and you and I have had this conversation on cyber. I love the capability of cyber. I do think it's ubiquitous. I think for the longest time it was cool in and of itself. Now it's just the way almost every interest of both our own and our adversaries and competitors is going to be affected. However, our friend Paul Nakasone was both the head of the NSA and the head of Cyber Command during some really consequential times, did prove that a leader who is good at their job and understands the whole of it can overcome almost any organizational construct to deliver great outcome. I was hugely on the side of separating the NSA leadership of the National
Mhm.
Security Agency and Cybercom, and then Paul Nakasone came in and he used that bolus of resources to incredible effect. So, I do think back to the point I was making, that is, when you have good leadership, almost any organizational construct can work. So then let's look at who we have leading our entities. And if we have good leaders who understand the issues and the demands that they're facing, they'll be able to work within almost any construct. Probably you and I don't want to worry too much about this, even though we could choose our favorite organizational construct.
That's right.
Mm,
I don't think
well,
the sky's falling on this one.
yeah, nah.
Let's transition over to Trump Media and this TAE, Energy and AI. So Trump Media, the parent company of True Social, announced a roughly $6 billion all-stock merger with fusion startup TAE Technologies. It's a pairing that is being pitched as a way to build utility-scale fusion power, not fission like we use now, fusion to meet the exploding electricity demand from AI data centers. This rhymes with what we've already flagged on this show, talking about some of the Trump family's investments and deals in the crypto orbit, WLFI and its dollar peg stablecoins. Because we've got CFIUS concerns, IP leakage, supply chain, etc. TAE itself, they seem reputable enough. Founded in 1998, they're based in Lake Flores, California. Got roughly about 300 employees and are the developer of a commercial power management tool designed to offer and commercialize safe and cost-effective fusion. They use hydrogen boron fusion energy And in June, they just completed a funding round that included investments from Chevron Technology Ventures, AGI Capital, Alphabet, and Goldman Sachs Group. So some pretty reputable names there, and especially in the venture game. They're also on their 21st deal, so they needed cash. And to me, this deal sounds a lot like a special purpose acquisition company, a SPAC. Because Trump Media Group is a publicly listed company, this would move TAE onto the public markets and access to additional capital. So I have some concerns from a corporate strategy perspective, Sue, but what are your initial thoughts on some of the strategic fit?
It's ridiculous. That's oh my gosh, that may be the first time that I actually caused Eric
Yeah,
to breathe in. I chose a word that you didn't have to bleep though, so there you go. It's
that's
just
right.
it's ridiculous, and it makes no sense. It feels performative. It feels kind of like the Trump administration latching onto a technology, making it seem like it's investing in that technology to make that technology closer than it appears. So, ugh. And you'll talk about kind of how mergers normally go. But let's take a quick digression into fusion. So, fusion's a real thing, right? And fusion is something that has long been a quest because fusion is basically fusing atoms
Hmm.
like the power of the sun, right?
Yep, bringing them together. And
Brings them together and it can run continuously and it releases enormous energy. And it is everyone's holy grail from an energy perspective. And so it is a real thing. The problem is it's super hard. And even though we have achieved it briefly, it is really hard to develop a system that can run continuously, scale economically, or connect to the grid. So we
yeah,
are really far away. So that there is a company that is doing work to try and advance this capability, go company. To suppose that it is close enough to be the winner in this, I think is unrealistic. So then what's the game really going
hmm,
on? Does the merger help financially? I'd certainly gain some visibility for the company, and knowing this administration's proclivity for getting friends to do things in its interests, I can see people who want to curry favor with the president would say, "Well, let's become investors in this company." Again, investment accelerates performance, but I don't know, is this really the way we wanna go? Is this yet another kind of corruption of kind of let the best person win with the best argument, or are we putting our thumb on the scale in order to get a company that merges with True Social to get more investment dollars? There's big physics issues that need to be addressed. So I expect there'll be splashiness, but it feels a little more performative than it's likely to actually advance fusion in any meaningful way, even though, as you said, the company itself seems to be, a great little company that's working way hard. Talk to us a little bit about how mergers really occur, what you have to think about in terms of whether they're beneficial. And since True Social is the public company, you have to now start answering a lot of questions. Who do you put in management? Who's going to run these things? What benefit do the True Social leadership have for this newly acquired entity? So,
exactly. Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from the company. They
yeah,
came out of a university years ago. The founders
yeah.
were both researchers,
Ah,
and I think they have the plan for fusion, and hopefully they do. Fusion would be phenomenal for us.
yeah, it's real science. It is real science with real promise.
But that's also why it flags the questions. There's a couple different options as companies are looking to grow, right? You've got horizontal integration, which is where a company expands from the same stage of the value chain. They're acquiring or merging with companies that are direct competitors or in their similar horizontal lane. You've also got vertical integration, where you want to expand up or down your value chain. So that's by acquiring with or merging companies that are upstream, suppliers, and then downstream, possibly distributors. But here, I don't see much of a strategic fit because there's no operational synergy, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
TAE builds nuclear fusion reactors. Trump Media runs a politically driven social media platform. So it's not horizontal. They're not in the same industry. It's not value chain related. It's not vertical. This is a financial engineering option to get them access to capital in the public markets. And to me, it looks like I mentioned earlier, a backdoor public listing, much like a SPAC, would allow TAE to avoid some of the scrutiny of a traditional IPO. They don't have to go on the roadshow. They don't have to do the underwriting. They don't have delayed full financial disclosures. And because Trump Media Group is so thinly traded and pretty volatile, the market isn't really marking in their risk as well as they would if this company was to go public on their own.
Companies acquire, merge all the time. So I think you made a great point of why the business case doesn't make a lot of sense. Here's just another point I want to make. Listen, fusion is extraordinary science, but it isn't an energy policy for this decade. And overhyping it delays real decisions on grids and fuels and resilience. I mean, heck, we haven't even figured out what we're doing about data centers, and
Right.
that's an alligator close to everyone's boat. And so this feels a little distractive. And even though hope is inspiring, man, timelines are governing, and there isn't a timeline that makes sense for this to really have an effect on energy. And so that it almost just confuses the where do we put our money and where do we put our investment as a nation. So I think there's some downside effect of this overhyping as well.
What else you watching?
I'm looking at my window in Austin at Longhorn Stadium, and I note that there's a provision in the NDAA about barring the use of DJI, Chinese manufactured drones.
Yeah.
And I think that will be interesting to see if they're able to do the audits they need to of the company in time to not launch the ban on the use of those drones.
Mm,
So one, do we have the processes in place in order to be able to affect what we're writing into law? But the second thing
no.
is I know. But the second thing is the University of Texas gonna have to come up with lesser manufacturers of drones in order to put on its football game time shows, which are pretty remarkable.
Yeah, all the drone shows are at risk, huh? New Year's Eve drone shows.
I mean, I'm being a little glib here, but I will say anytime you start banning a technology, on the one hand, Sue and Eric, national security hawks, of course, worry about DJI drones, and I wouldn't own one because of the Chinese pedigree that means that the data that go through them could be given to the Chinese national security apparatus.
Right.
But this idea of just banning foreign things and how in the world you're gonna enforce that. It's just a perfect example of the kinds of problems I wish we would undertake, not just the top line splashy headlines with no implementation plan beyond it. But
Yep.
I do really enjoy the drone shows at University of Texas. So to the University of Texas athletic department, just keep an eye on this space and get ahead of it because I wanna see the drone shows next year too.
Well, you could do it like TikTok. TikTok says that they've signed a deal to move their U.S. operations into the joint new venture backed by the American investors. So you've got Oracle, Silver Lake, and MGX. They'll each hold a 15% share in TikTok, and then another 30.1% will be held by affiliates of existing ByteDance investors, and 19.9 will be retained by the Chinese-based ByteDance, according to this memo that came out. The U.S. venture will have a new 7-member majority American board of directors, and U.S. data will be stored locally on systems run by Oracle. And the algorithm, the secret sauce that powers the addictive feed, will be retrained on U.S. user data to, quote, ensure the content feed is free from outside manipulation. Target close date of this deal is January 22nd. So we'll see.
Yep. Let's see. I'm also watching Venezuela, seizure of a third.
Going after the third boat. Yeah.
Going after the third tanker. Maybe we'll talk about this in our next episode. Much as with the shooting of the narco terrorists' supposed boats, I hear what they're saying in terms of why we're allowed to do it. I think it is really sketchy legal ground that we are citing some historical harm that gives us a justification to on the high seas property that isn't ours. So I'm watching that. But maybe the new Unified America's Command will also have a much stronger unified JAG Corps that is able to produce legal arguments to support the policies we intend to advance. So I'm watching that.
There you go. Last one I'm watching is Santa Claus. Gonna have my NORAD tracker up on Wednesday night as we're going into Christmas Eve. And this may be the year that we actually call the watch officer out there in Colorado and see if they're tracking Santa.
Yeah, I love this. Follow it. Use the tracker. Santa is someone we trust. Tracking is something we have come to trust. Remember, for all those days that it seems dark and that we'll never come together, this is a mission that we can do against a global truth that we must preserve. So there you go.
That's right. Listen to your parents. Stay
Yeah.
on the nice list.
Yeah. Stay on the nice list. Anyway, Eric, just for all our listeners, what a year 2025 has been, right? And for all the ups and downs of it, I'm glad I've got a chance to talk about it with you and to share our thoughts with our listeners. We love our country, we love our people, and we have hope for our future.
That's right. And thanks for watching and listening. Thank you for joining us. No doubt there's more to come. And our strength isn't in the power, industry, or government, but in the people. So Merry Christmas.
And as always, remember, we're here for you. Look for links at the show notes to provide feedback or topics for next time. And join us next week. We will be here next week on Tuesday.
That's right.
Wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another because it makes all the difference.